Good afternoon. It is 3:25 p.m. on April 24th, 2021. My understanding is that there are elements of the bandwidth right now ongoing that have been recapitulated. Yesterday, there were at least 2 to 3 demonstrations of a concurrence in terms of some sort of interference with particular transmissions on certain satellite networks. And I was personally in observance of at least twice, and also understand that I have been witnessing what is illicit, illegal, and inappropriate activity on a certain spectrum of bandwidth. People who should not have access are attempting to access it and claim some sort of right of access, and I am not acknowledging their authority. I am, however, going to acknowledge that at this time, bandwidth that I am transmitting on is being hacked, and insofar as it is being hacked, there is an illegal effort at inverse indexing occurring. So I am going to do something I've never done before, and I wouldn't do, except that I am going to speak in the first person as if I am that whom I understand believes that they need to have acknowledgement as the authority. There are some concerns that have come up today. Today's the 25th anniversary of the 1996 Anti-Terrorist and Effective Death Penalty Act. It would seem that what it was a 25-year outlay on exploiting people in order to create a specific kind of interface to effectuate a type of alleged digital economy. It's not actually a digital economy. Oh dear. I can't cede my authority. I apologize. I attempted to speak in the first person of that whom believed that they were entitled to say that this is actually them, and it's not. So, it is important to understand that in this last 25 years, paradigms have been set up for the abuse of and by alleged law enforcement to engage in large-scale acts of identity theft. What has happened, so far as I understand, is there have been an attempt to acclimate and assimilate what had previously or otherwise been identified as acts of crime, up to and including RICO conspiracies and or large-scale organized crime syndicates, including ones that had been before Congress and or had actually received some sort of criminal prosecution. There's plenty of examples, and there are at least 2 that are primary for consideration at this point in time, including the allegations concerning Arthur Anderson after September 11th, but prior, and concerning the relationship with Enron, but specifically after September 11th, wherein what were operations, enterprises, or activities legally and constitutionally engaged by either private citizens or groups of persons within the United States of America were allowed to be characterized as criminal so that they could be acquired by actors within the government to be reappropriated for their own personal use. One of the things that is going on right now is an investigation of records concerning both the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, starting with the 1980s. I allege that individuals that were in the legislature abused their role in alleged intelligence in order to create private strategies to advantage themselves at this time frame now. And this is one of the reasons why Executive Order 12866 has not been repealed, and rather it is one of the most frequently cited executive orders in any other executive order since it was passed in the 90s. So any discussion right now of what is being masqueraded as some sort of energy paradigm connected to infrastructure development has to take into account that up until this time, there has been no rescission of, and there has been no cancellation of, and there has been no revocation of Executive Order 12866. It is being done in an intentionally deceitful and deceptive purpose as part of a long-term conspiracy in order to try to masquerade what is happening now as being about something it is not. And there's plenty of evidence going on right now to demonstrate what this conspiracy actually entails. Right now, there is information that is being presented that is attempting to try to compel people to engage in a sort of whitewashing or a sort of overstepping of what had already been set up in the past administration through the normalization of econometrics as a replacement for actual engagement around the financial system and accountability for the financial system. Part of what has been happening with the global pension system, including the domestic pension system in the last year and a half, has had to do with a form of metrics flipping that is part of a long-standing system that was first provided by major banks within the United States as part of a report during the 1980s that ended up having an update in the early 1990s concerning the use of econometrics in a particular form of accounting Now, outside of the contextualization of the use of econometrics with a application of what is already congressionally mandated, accrual accounting for the congressional budgeting process, we have a big potential problem, and that big potential problem is coming to a head right now. In the course of this, what has happened is massive acts of identity theft, which have intentionally refused to authenticate source origin. And in the course of doing that, large swaths of people have been blackmailed or extorted into cooperating with intentionally engaging acts of identity theft of others and allowing themselves to masquerade or to pretend as if they are someone else, with an understanding that the efforts to extort them into cooperation are going to increase and increase and increase. And this brings up the matters that are ongoing right now. One of the things that we are going to have to deal with in the very near future is the proliferation of sex trafficking as a substitute for an actual currency and as a substitute for any sort of actual reform or sort of addressing of the situation regarding labor, and specifically how labor constitutes a form of energy, including bioenergy, and has been mischaracterized and misassessed in the alleged green energy paradigm. In the autumn of 2015, there was a hearing in the city of San Francisco. At that time, there was a ballot issue for the city and county of San Francisco regarding support of a program called Green SF. Green SF was a municipal energy program that was being proposed as a competitor to the primary energy provider for the city, which was PG&E. It was supposed to be associated with the Public Utilities Commission, was meant to be a form of public production, but also distribution, which was distinct from the role that the PUC had played previously. Now, there's a very much more complicated relationship between the PUC and PG&E, specifically around leasing rights to what legally qualifies as green energy in the state of California. But the major thing that came up is during the time of this ballot initiative in the city and county, there was also a hearing before the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, a committee of the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, specific to the Green SF program. At this meeting, members of Green SF were presenting a presentation to the members of the Board of Supervisors. One of the board supervisors, whose name I did not get at the time, it was a woman, made a very specific request and said, "We have been asking you for your data for months. Where's your data? You say you're ready to move on this, but you've been refusing for months to provide us with actual data." The man literally had a clipboard, and on the clipboard, this was his presentation of their projection of what they expected in terms of the results from the implementation of the Green SF paradigm. No metrics. A straight line showing an ascending, a smiley face, and an indication that there was happiness. This was their proposal less than a month before they were supposed to actually implement the changes that had been discussed as part of the Green SF program. Now, I was out of the state of California before that time frame came. And not only that, there was also a concurrent process within the state of California regarding a construction and a initiation of a desalination plant in another part of the state. But this is exactly what they're trying to do. It is important to know that there were other things that went on at that specific meeting that were also indicative of things yet to come. But the very important part is to understand the Board of Supervisors itself had to say, "You have not given us any data." And the man who was the official representative of the program let them know he had no intention of it. This was reflected in numerous reports within a 10-year time frame of that very event, specific to the Bay Area water conservation system, and the relationship that the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission played when it came to accessing hydroelectric energy for other sorts of green energy provision in Northern California and elsewhere. I bring this up because something has happened within the last month that is equally concerning. If you've been to a foreign country recently, you know that many foreign countries, special foreign countries that are identified as having very significant narco-terrorist activity or a very significant drug problem that may impact local crime, have a specific policy when it comes to cell phone usage, including cell phone usage regarding what would be otherwise identified as burner phones. There's processes in some countries where you actually have to register the SIM chip with a ministry or with a local department when you are in the process of acquiring the phone. And if you are using the network, the local network, without having your SIM chip registered, then this means something very specific, especially in terms of how it can be tracked. Now, this is the technology, and this is also the standard that has been applicable in the countries of the Northern Triangle, if nothing else, since 2015 when I was on site and exposed to this. The point of the matter is that at any given time, the technology exists to be able to identify the specific cell phone, and a lot of other things can be accomplished in that regard as well. Part of what this would mean would be cache records of the actual phone calls, text messages. If they use their cell phone to get into any website in order to make a transaction, up to and including checking their credit card. And that brings up the corollary, which are prepaid credit cards. We have had more than 15 years in the United States alone of complete misrepresentation of the actual situation on who has personal credit, who has debt, who has outstanding obligation, and who the actual financial activity is actually coming from and where it is going to. In the course of this, keeping track of our actual financial records real time presumably was supposed to be one of the advantages of the digital economy. You're supposed to be able to have your phone, all you got to do is tap it, you open up the app, you know what's going on. I've even seen apps that can real-time monitor micro fluctuations to the credit of particular individuals that might have high credit activity associated with their identity or with accounts associated with their identity. But we should also have the option to say we do not need to constantly be being tracked in connection with our economic activity using a cell phone with an app. And what they've done now is created a process whereby they are making it exclusive to having a cell phone for which you can be constantly tracked in order to even access your transaction record. Within the last month, since the beginning of April, they have taken the online features and the online websites associated with certain kinds of prepaid credit cards or credit cards that have a very small amount of credit associated with them. People that might be building their credit. So you get a prepaid card, you sign up to an account, you try to acquire and establish some sort of credit using that. They have eliminated the possibility for even reviewing your own transaction record. This has been going on for the last 3 weeks. Prior to the implementation of this policy, what I noticed and what I observed real time is fake transactions being put on the credit card for a period of 1 to 3 days and then just disappearing. And so what they're doing is they're using people's actual credit account, regardless of the level they're at, including the micro level, and they are laundering money. And unless you got a cell phone wherein they can ping you, and then they can make you constantly perform transactions for them, you're not even supposed to be able to see your transaction record. Literally today, I just got what was supposed to be a credit card statement. There's no information. It could be looking like this, or does it look like this? And that's a big consideration right now, because if I let somebody else say that they're the one on this bandwidth right now, I'm sure it would look like this, but I'm not. So I might have to prepare myself to deal with this, and so might a lot of us as well. I believe it is an act of extortion. I believe it is an attempt to try to inure people to engaging in even more increased levels of illegal activity under the auspices of energy, whereas last year it was under the auspices of a pandemic response. These are immediate concerns. These are actionable offenses for consideration of acts of war against our own country, and anybody supporting that needs to be held accountable accordingly. Now, I'm going to say something very specific. Part of what I've noticed in the last 48 to 72 hours specifically is that some of these incursions, specifically regarding regulation of bandwidth, have been in connection directly with media that is providing reporting for the business sector. As somebody that used to be in media, including somebody that used to be a newspaper editor that understands both the political and financial ramifications for what is put into the public realm, including a disclosure, including inaccurate information and the need to be held accountable for knowingly and willingly versus putting information out that later turns out to be inaccurate. and especially in an understanding that emergent threats and the public information on emergent threats can be the difference between a certain number of people ending up being exposed to danger and large numbers of people ending up dead. I believe the media in the United States, and specifically the business media in the United States, has a higher standard. The business media has a responsibility to distinguish between legal and illegal business practices. The business media has a responsibility to distinguish between illicit finance and what is actually the kind of finance that is relevant to the people of the United States. The business media has a disproportionate burden on it to assure that we are not being wholesale robbed by people who do not actually have the credit themselves and are instead attempting to command the bandwidth so that they are the ones that are allowed to force centralize it. What is being attempted under the auspices of this green energy program are completely unconstitutional. It is something that has been warned about for a considerable amount of time. The United States has spent more than 20 years intentionally slandering and doing everything it can to debase and degrade countries that had national economic sectors, up to and including energy sectors, but up to and including other aspects of their sectors where they had some form of collective economy or some form of cooperative arrangement around production as well as distribution. The United States and the particular business model that is promulgated by the mainstream media, specifically the mainstream business media, and that has been enacted by the major banking and financial establishments of the United States, has done everything it can to discredit that model. And instead, what we've seen with COVID-19 is an intentional effort at forced collectivization of all of the private resources within the rubric of a very narrow, centralized organizational structure that has refused to hold itself accountable and has refused to engage in changes to the law, including international law associated with international conventions, including aspects of the Basel Convention, and including other things that were attendant with timelines that were already pre-existing associated with Brexit. Right now, my understanding is we are in the last year of what was the former system under Lieber. This has not been discussed and it has not been analyzed enough. I believe that as an appropriate dismantling of the former system under Lieber, what we need is actual prosecutions for protracted periods of long-term systematic racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and practices that in the modern technological era are actually engaging and enabling the financial system to engage in acts of genetic engineering. And part of the way they intend to accomplish this is to try to devolve our consciousness to even have the most basic capability to engage in a process of even tracking our own financial activity insofar as we're allowed to acknowledge having any. We do not have a political platform that supports this. And insofar as there is a specific emphasis on the need for maintaining a particular kind of market element in order to provide us with our basic needs, insofar as there's a justification, there's a disproportionate burden of proof on those that I've identified themselves as being members of the media, and especially members of the media associated with the economic system or the sectors related to business and finance. Finally, I'm going to say that it has come to my attention that the proliferation of and the promulgation of sex trafficking, not only in this country, but globally, is an epidemic. But here's another matter that needs to be considered in accordance with what sex trafficking is. When you tell somebody that they are required to engage in sexual activity in order to fulfill commercial functions, including in their own home, including sexual activity attempting to excitate them and harvest their bioenergy even if they're alone, things that have been addressed at least legally by other people as a form of self-pleasure or onanation. And if you try to compel this activity and use threats of economic harm to coerce people into performance on cue, that is a form of sex trafficking. Likewise, if somebody has already identified themselves as either politically, spiritually, or religiously committed to a practice of monogamy and or an exclusive marital relationship when it comes to any sort of conjugal activities, and anybody is trying to coerce them or compel them to engage in other kinds of sexual activity, or threatens to withhold resources from them, up to and including the means to communicate or provide for themselves, and or attempting to threaten them with physical violence, that is also sex trafficking. When you keep people from being able to be authentic about their sexualities in a consensual and safe manner, and then you try to use that as leverage for economic activity, that's sex trafficking. And this is what we have to deal with right now. It's 3:46 p.m. on April 24th, 2021.